In the non-traditional form, sex trafficking is everywhere.
The children very literally can be, run the spectrum from children who didn't graduate elementary school to kids that have a full ride to college, right? So there is no typical victim. The vast majority of the demand, 65% of the demand, comes from outside of the perimeter, and 42% out of the 65 comes from north of the perimeter, particularly between that 75 and 85 corridor. What it comes down to is that's where the disposable income is.
My father was in and out of my life. My mother worked a lot. Therefore, I wasn't watched much, and I started to dibble and dabble with drugs. I was raped, and my virginity was taken at an early age.
So many times these kids are being exploited by somebody that they know. A lot of times their parents are the ones doing the exploiting.
Most of our cases that we see, a good majority of them, have a history of sexual abuse with one or more children in the family. And we know that if a child has been sexually abused, they have a much higher likelihood of going through some sort of sex trafficking.
Sexual abuse will oftentimes disrupt the equilibrium that's going on inside that child. So their sense of safety, their sense of well-being, healthy relationships, all of that is kind of affected because of the sexual abuse. And sometimes it develops hypersexuality at a young age, which then results in them seeking sexual relationships early. And of course, what we know about traffickers is that they're predators.
I had plans to wait until I was married. Now I felt so alone, abandoned, violated. I began to think sex wasn't a big deal, and I was sexually active and very promiscuous. I began stripping to survive and make money. I was seeking just basic necessities and ended up with a man who only wanted to use me and take advantage of my situation.
What we know about children who are in foster care is they have a lack of stability. So they could be living one place for a month or 6 months and then somewhere else the next. So their whole sense of community, their whole sense of safety is constantly eroded. And so this makes them vulnerable to meeting people that they normally wouldn't have met had they had a more stable household. It makes them vulnerable to developing friendships that are unhealthy. It makes them vulnerable to looking for parental figures and people who are unsafe.
Georgia Cares released a statistic back in 2014 that said 91% of the victims that they served in the state of Georgia were enrolled in school at the time that they were exploited. But only 1% of teachers were trained to recognize and report the signs. Police have to be educated on this as well, because when they're dealing with a victim who is kicking and screaming and not wanting to go with them, and no, this is my boyfriend, they just think that that might be a bad kid or someone who's strung out and they're really just a problem. So they're dealt with as criminals as opposed to victims. And so when they understand what kind of physical, emotional trauma has gone on, they better understand where that child is coming from and the best way to serve them. And so we've seen a real shift from treating children as criminals towards treating children as victims. We'll post ads in Norcross, Duluth, Lawrenceville, Johns Creek area, Alpharetta. We've posted them now in Cumming, in the Forsyth area. Every time we have callers, but at least 50 a night. The folks who are buying are not the boogeyman. They're not all pedophiles either, which is really interesting. They are people who have disposable income that are looking to have sex, and they don't care who it is that they're having sex with.
After moving again with another guy, prostitution began all over again in order to make ends meet and to find a way to survive.
All the groups in this space are continually looking for, okay, where are the gaps? And then we fill them and, okay, now are there new ones, or have we missed something? And demand has always been a huge gap. There's just, folks are not focusing on it. They want to, they don't really know how to. And so we've determined that that's where we want to be. So very recently, just this year, in fact, we've shifted our focus and we're focusing entirely almost on demand. We have a couple of programs that are doing that. One is the transaction intercept, where we're actually intercepting callers that are likely looking for underage sex and giving them a deterrence message and access to resources so that they can get some help.
It's important that you cooperate on this phone call because I want to give you information that can help you in the future.
I found myself on the ground crying on a cold, dark concrete floor, asking, praying, seeking God. Is this all there is to life? When will the pain ever stop? Does he even hear me cry?
Other groups are working on restoration, other groups are working on prevention care and things like that. The number of beds, of therapeutic restorative beds in the state is pathetic. It's sad. And it's not because these groups aren't doing incredible work. I think Wellspring has something like an 88% success rate with their graduates. So what the Safe Harbor Fund would do is collect money in order to be dispersed to these organizations, just to help them with their budgets and to be able to provide these restorative services to victims.
There's not nearly enough programs like this in America or in the world in general for especially the number of victims that there are.
It's happening so often with the young women not realizing that it is a form of exploitation. Whether they're using drugs and they believe that I just need to go out there and get a fix for a quick moment, and this is what my boyfriend is telling me is the easiest way to do it. And sometimes their life becomes accustomed to it, and so they think that it's the right thing to do until someone shares with them, whether they get arrested and someone shares with them, hey, you know, you can live a different life, you don't have to do this.
My life is slowly changing with each passing day here at Cherith. God has opened my eyes to see the love that he has for me, and I am no longer the same. I am no longer carrying the guilt and baggage, shame and feelings of being unwanted. I am God's creation and a beautiful example of his handiwork.
Demand is what keeps this going. If there was no demand, there'd be nothing to sell. We always have the 8-track example. When's the last time you saw an 8-track for sale in the store? You don't see them anymore because nobody wants them. So if we can end demand, then there's nothing to sell and our kids are safer.